start the session today. As you've probably also noted, this session will be recorded, so hopefully you're all comfortable with that. But if not, if you can message Luke, the producer, then we'll see what we can do. Welcome, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this masterclass session today on culturally intelligent decision making. I'm Cecilia Harvey, and I'll be your facilitator today. For those who know Country Navigator and have attended workshops and masterclasses before, you will know that these are interactive. So please do use the chat function. I'm really looking forward to hearing your comments and having your questions through that. But also we'll be using interactive boards throughout the session. So please feel free to use those and to engage with this session. I don't like to sort of think of myself as a teacher, and you're not pupils. I just think we're having interesting, hopefully stimulating conversations with some key takeaways for you. But I usually learn a lot myself through these sessions as well. So I'm really delighted that you can join. I see we've got 63 people so far, and hopefully others will be able to join if they're able to. So let's get right stuck in. If we can have the next slide, please, Luke. Thank you. So today's session really aims to help you understand and build strategies essentially to bridge cultural gaps and to how to be more effective in your decision making when you're in cross-cultural situations. So there's a fun and probably also quite an incredible fact that I wanted to share with you just to start us off. And that is that we make approximately 30,000 decisions every day. Now, in that huge number and this constant stream of decision making and data filtering that we do, it may or may not come as a surprise to you that sometimes we get it wrong and we're not very good at it. So as we dive into this topic today, I'd like to get you thinking around something in particular, and that is that even not making a decision is a decision in itself. So I'll leave you with that thought. So whether we're aware of it or not, our choices and our judgments are influenced by a variety of factors. Now, Luke's going to kindly pop in the chat a link to our first mural activity. And if you've not used mural before, this is quite sort of intuitive, and you can remain anonymous, or you can pop your name in there. And the first question I'd really like you to have fun with and think about is, how do you make decisions? How do you personally make decisions? Is it that you usually go with your gut instinct? So are you very sort of gut feeling type person? Are you logical in your reasoning? Do you seek input from others before you make decisions? Therefore, do you ask your friends? Do you ask opinions before, and that helps you formulate your decision making? Or maybe it's a mix of all of these, or maybe it depends on the various situations. So really have a think about what influences you might have before you make a decision, or what type of elements really shape your decision making. So I love murals, and hopefully you've all been exposed to them before, but if not, I strongly encourage you to use these because they're a real game changer, and they're so fun and interesting and interactive. So I'll give you a second to sort of play around here with the stickies, with the notes, and really, pop down as many things as you can, and we'll try and go through as many as we can. There's now 93 people on the call, so we probably won't have time, unfortunately, today to go through every single one of them. But as the session is recorded, hopefully you will also then be able to see what others on the call have put on there, and it might help even post this masterclass. It might help stimulate you a little bit in your thinking. Also in the chat, we will try and go through as many as possible. I always love the interaction that happens on these sessions, but sadly we can't probably respond to all of these today. But I will also obviously have the chat record, the recording with everything, and I can, if there's anything in particular that we feel, the team and I feel that that is relevant, we can then still communicate that back to you. So let's have a look. Okay, so take a step back, try to understand the environment and the consequences. Yeah, really like that one. Listening to others and make up your mind. So okay, so you get input beforehand. Logical when I know about the topic, and gut when it's not familiar. That's a really interesting one. Probably I identify quite a lot with that one. A mix of logic and my own opinion. Someone else said, evaluate the side effects of the decisions. Okay, that's already really quite culturally intelligent. Like to maybe hear more in the second part or the next part of the session from the person who posted that, because I think that's very much what we're talking about today. Because most of us think that when we make decisions, we do so with sort of good and logical judgment, but actually sometimes what we need to challenge is we need to challenge whether we've had good logic. So I really like that element of evaluating how that can impact others, how our decisions can impact others. My opinion and feeling I have towards a situation. Yeah, very good. Experiences, again, really important in this context. Gut first. Okay, that's a definite gut first. I think it also does depend. Even in my case, I think sometimes it's I go with my gut because that's the strongest and the loudest voice that I can hear shouting at me. First, analyze the data, then a mix of mix gut feeling if stuck. Okay, so again, that's quite complex. I really like that. Based on the data, past experience, absolutely, and we're going to see how our experiences and our personal experiences very much influence the decisions we make and how they're fed by our past experiences. Jonari, I think if I'm reading that correctly, or Jonari, says seeking other perspectives. Very good, thank you. Depends, data or guts. Okay, so we're going to have quite a few interesting things in the chat, I think, afterwards as well, in terms of reading situations and deciding whether it's data is a combination of things, whether we go with our gut, and what type of things, as I said, influence and feed those elements. Because if we don't have the data, then what happens? How does that translate? Because we might not have the data, in which case are we more heavily reliant upon the gut and the sort of feeling element. 1, clear target. 2, collect info, docs and asking. And 3, decision. Very structured. That response there in particular, really structured. Thank you very much. Get some data, make a decision, and check other inputs. Okay, that's interesting, because that's allowing for other inputs. That's already welcoming something else to the table. So that's really a really interesting point of view as well. Think fast and slow. Try to think fast but acting slow. Yes, I guess easier said than done. I admire that, because I think we are often in this fast-paced environment and working environment, and actually even in our personal lives, it's quite tricky to sort of keep up with our fast thinking, but to act slow. So I really like that one. Gut feeling is important. I 100% would agree with that also. I think very often our instincts don't betray us, but I think what we're going to try and aim to do in this session is try and challenge that a little bit and try and say, okay, so my gut feeling told me this, but what is my gut feeling based on? And can I unpick some of that in order to make a slightly more informed decision, a slightly better decision? Risk tolerance and preference. Yeah, we're gonna look at that a little bit later in the session as well. I think risks very often is an important element in when we're making decisions. And like someone else said, if you're evaluating the effect that your decision has on others, then you might be also evaluating the risk. So if I say this, does it risk that I upset this person? Does it risk that then, I don't know, they see me in a different light? Or what is the risk around that? I'm going to have a quick look here in the chat. Oh, this is maybe a question for Luke. Tim joined us slightly later, so he wants to access the mural. I think if you just scroll a couple of rows up, Tim, you'll see there's a link in the chat. So hopefully you can join. Fantastic. So all we're doing here, Tim, is I asked the rest of your fellow participants to have a think about how you make decisions. How are they formed, do you think? And whether it's a mix of your gut instincts, whether it's logical thinking and more informed data type thinking, or whether you ask others. We'll be looking at how some people actually really sort of evaluate how their decisions are going to impact others and influence others. And someone else talked about risk a little bit. So I guess deciding on how risky a particular decision might be, or how that might influence others. Past experience is something that someone else also mentioned, and I think we base so many things on things that we've experienced in the past, or maybe things that others have experienced and shared with us. So I think today also we want to draw on the fact that we form ideas and we use those and we form opinions, and knowledge and judgment is also informed by others and their experience. So it's still very busy on the mural, and I really hate cutting you off, because I think it's really interesting how there's such a variety of things, but how also there are quite a few commonalities here in terms of people being already quite aware of how they make decisions. So that's a good thing in the first place, but also aware of interactions that they might have and how that might affect others. And I like the thought of being very conscious of when we're making decisions, and making intentional decisions when we're interacting with others. And I think this is particularly important when it's in a cross-cultural setting. So I think probably we should move on slightly and go to the next slide. Please, Luke. Fantastic. So thank you so much. Now, let's try and understand a little bit more about the biases and the impact that they have on our decision making. Now, the reason we sort of need a bit of constructive disagreement is because very often our thought processes are flawed, and the biases that influence our thought processes lead us to make decisions which very often are suboptimal. So every day we're bombarded with millions of pieces of information, and precisely 11 million per second. Now, of course, we can't compute all of those, and we can't really rationalize and absorb so much information, and therefore we rely on our unconscious mind to create some shortcuts based on our background, on our education, on our cultural experiences, on our personal experiences, and not necessarily just based on our culture. But we make very quick, snap decisions about everything around us. But very often, as I said, these lead to decisions which might not be the right ones, might be suboptimal, might have incurred extra risk. So I'd like you to pop in the chat the answer to this question. Some of you may have come across it before, but on the screen you'll see there's an image of a bat and ball, and as a package they come at the cost of $1.10. My question to you is, if the bat costs $1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? And I'd like you to all have a little think about that, a quick think, and then pop your answers in the chat. I'm going to have a look. I'll give, there's quite a few of you on the call, so I'll give you a little bit longer to try and solve this this riddle. But it's an interesting one, and I certainly was stumped with it, and my thinking and my process and my decision making in giving the answer led me to the wrong one. So I will reveal to you, and you might be surprised. Some of you, I was reading in the chat, quite a few of you got it right. But quite a few of you, like myself, and also 50% of students from some of the world's leading universities also got it wrong. So the answer is actually 5 cents. Now, our brain heard $1. So when I asked you if the bat costs $1, how much does the ball then cost? The brain, our brains, decided to do a quick, simple subtraction and came up with the answer of 10 cents in a lot of cases. Now, the reason why we get confused about this is because we haven't processed properly, and we haven't thought with a sort of specifically more informed data set. We haven't thought of the riddle properly, because for the bat to cost $1 more than the ball has to cost 5 cents. Hence, the bat itself alone is $1.05. So if you're still not sure, it might be easier to write it down. I certainly had to write it down. But as I said, this has stumped quite a few people in the past, and it's a really good anecdote, and it's a really good way of showing how our mind works and how quickly that snap decision, that gut feeling, oh, it's definitely 10 cents, because we hear $1, we look at the 10 on the screen, and hey presto, we've decided that that's the answer. So our unconscious mind makes those snap judgments, as demonstrated, but around everything that surrounds us, including the people we meet, and sometimes even before we know we've made that snap judgment, even before we've realized. So we tend to favor, because that's what makes us feel more comfortable, we tend to favor those who are most similar to us. So I'm bringing the context back here in terms of interactions, in terms of decision-making in culturally complex settings. And the reason we do that is because we don't feel comfortable outside our comfort zone. And our comfort zone says that we have preferences to be surrounded by and mix with and collaborate with and team up with people who are most similar to us in culture, in style and preference of working, whatever the similarity may be. And we feel less comfortable, which is where we enter the sort of fear zone of our growth, of our personal growth, and therefore retract and backtrack into the comfort zone. But actually, we really need, and I would encourage you to push yourself sometimes outside that comfort zone, because that is where the growth happens. That's where learning happens. That's where we enrich our experiences. And I think, good decisions depend on good judgment, but good judgments that we rely upon, and being able to sort through relevant information and draw the right conclusions. We've got to, if we think about it in that way, we've also got to think that when we make wrong ones or bad ones, we have to recognize that our brains have gone down, they've bypassed some important information, and they've gone down a different neurological path that leads us to make these suboptimal decisions. If we could go to the next slide, please, Luke. And I think to better explain this a little bit, we need to delve into a little bit more about systems of thinking, and how developing our cultural intelligence helps us develop what Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist, thinks of. If we can have the first image, please, Luke. Okay, so Daniel Kahneman talks of two systems of thinking, system one and system two. Now, system one is very much about what we've been talking about, the gut feeling, the being bombarded with millions of pieces of information and quickly sifting through and snap judgments and immediate responses based on our personal experience, historical facts that we try and compare to the ones that we're currently in the current situation. System two thinking is very, very effortful. It takes an incredible amount of thought. It's more considered, it's more intentional, and is fed by a lot of data, a lot of assumptions, and draws in and attracts and welcomes different perspectives. So when we're thinking about this, it's easy to see how system one is almost our default way of thinking. And really, the system one does account for a lot of those 30,000 decisions that we spoke about earlier that we make every day, because it's easier, because it's quicker, because it takes less effort, but also because of the amount of data that we're exposed to all the time, every day, and in making decisions. So if you bring that into an international and sort of complex organization, which is multicultural in its dimensions, we can see how not being exposed to experiences that match our past experience in system one and the history and things that we've lived or things that we've heard that others have lived, then our cultural lens gives us quite a restricted perspective on that situation, because we're only using a small data set. Which is why it's really important, as Daniel Kahneman explains, and he's a Nobel Prize winner in behavioral economy, and he sort of thinks that in order to help us become more culturally intelligent, we really must develop system two. So we must take time, carve out time, and make efforts to feed and inform our decisions with as much data as possible, and we must enrich ourselves with as many perspectives as possible, and assumptions, and also challenging assumptions. So our brains are biased in the way that in the process of decision making and assuming and stereotyping and assigning labels. And I'm sure we've all come across when people sort of the saying that people say that when you meet somebody, it's in the first 3 seconds of meeting them that you formed an opinion of them and you've made a judgment about them. So our example, shows and illustrates quite clearly how our system might be biased and how one set of thinking takes over from the other. And it's usually system one that takes over from system two, because those first impressions are what stick, and then when we go in and go and process. So Daniel Kahneman says, raised the very valid question, and I pose the same question to you. How do we enhance our system two thinking? How do we strengthen it? How do we flex ourselves and learn how to make that our default way of thinking? So it is informed by cultural intelligence, which is why we're here today. And it's informed by the 4 dimensions of CQ, cultural intelligence, which is attitude, awareness, knowledge, and last but not least, skills. And the skills that we put then into practice, that we action, are fed by that attitude, that awareness, and that knowledge. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Luke. So we start with attitude, as I've just mentioned, and then we move on to awareness. But it's so important to possess different perspectives to make better decisions. And when we filter through culturally diverse lenses, we're more likely to stimulate innovation, creativity, and for our ideas and the solutions that we present are more enriched. Because to make good decisions, we need to evaluate as much of the information and the data that we can in the best way possible. So when our awareness, when we are aware of how little we see, we're already stepping towards the sort of evolution into, okay, how do I then use that knowledge that I'm seeing something little and that awareness that I'm seeing something little, into the knowledge of bringing in other perspectives, a knowledge and awareness of other people's perspectives. So we've added attitude, because I think we also really need to be open to this in order for it to happen. We need to be welcoming to different perspectives, ideas, thought processes, work preferences. So we need to first be ready to receive. Then if we're aware then that ours has a certain set of limitations, then let's expand our knowledge. Let's really dive into what someone else thinks. Let's ask that. Let's be respectfully curious about different perspectives, different attitudes, different suggestions. Let's create environments where it's exciting to ask questions. It's exciting to challenge a particular way of thinking. And then we come to the skills part, which is fundamental. And that is how to bring those perspectives together. How do we create that sort of thin golden thread that ties it all together, that makes sure that our attitude and propensity that we've developed to gaining more knowledge, the awareness that maybe our data set is limited, and then the knowledge of someone else's perspectives, and the more enriching, and the more they are, the more enriching our solutions will also be. And then the skills, so putting that into practice. Okay, what does that mean? So mine is this perspective. I know that there are so many others, and I've heard from John, from Dave, from Katrina, from whoever it may be, about their points of view. Now, how do I connect these? But also, how do I connect them in the appropriate setting, in the right, to leverage them at the best possible solution? Now, there's a really great TED Talk by Rosalind Torres, who is an expert in all things leadership. And she talks a lot about what a great leader is. And there are some questions that she raises in this TED Talk, and I would really encourage you to go and find it. It's a great TED Talk, and she's very charismatic and inspirational. And she has based a lot of her questions that she asks in that. She has based it on her experience of meeting different leaders, of talking to people about leadership. What makes a great leader? What do we need to do to push ourselves to become great leaders? And let's not forget that leadership doesn't always have to be the MD, the CEO, the top of the chain. You could also lead in a particular dimension of your work. You can also be leading the cultural expertise of a particular part of a company. You don't need to necessarily be leading just people. So leadership as an attitude, leadership as a skill. And one of the great questions she asks is around sort of how are you going to change? How are you going to anticipate where you might need to change? And I really like that question, because it challenges what you're already doing. So it basically rocks you a little bit out of your comfort zone. It says, okay, this is all good. Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing great. And I'm happy and I'm successful. But if I change something, could it enhance it? Could I enhance my skills? Could I enhance my expertise? Could I enhance my interactions? So the comfort of your business life or your personal life, what are you spending time on? What are you doing? Or what are you reading? Are you traveling lots with work? And she has a really great sentence in this part of the talk that says, great leaders are not head down. They see around corners. And I thought that was so powerful, because it's exactly true. If we carry on our trajectory and we've got our heads down and we're just doing what we do, and we don't think about, could this be done better? We don't carve out time to question, to analyze, to interact with our own past experiences to see if we can have done it better. Then we are not looking around the corners. And we can sometimes be surprised about what's around the corner, but we can also be unpleasantly surprised about what's around the corner because we haven't thought about it, because we haven't created that scenario in our minds. She also talks about something that really reminded me of something I attended last week, in fact. So she talks about the diversity and of the interaction of the stakeholders that are in your life, in your personal life and in your career. So when I went to this event led by Women in Transport here in the UK, there was a great speaker, and she was talking about exactly this. And she asked every participant to write 5 names on the first line of stakeholders within her business, within the business that she worked in, and who she interacted with quite regularly. Then on the second line, she said, write down 5 names of key stakeholders in your personal life. And then in the bottom lane, 5 key stakeholders from other parts of your life. So maybe previous work, charity work that you might do, I don't know, coaching, football team, whatever that may be. And she said that she reevaluates these 3 levels of key stakeholders in her life twice a year, just to make sure that they are not just composed of people similar to her, or that who have studied the same things. So to make sure that those 15 people, and you might not necessarily have 5 on each row, and that's also fine, but make sure that in your spheres and in your microcosms of your work and personal life, you have stakeholders that can add value and to whom you can add value because of your differences. So who do I have in my circle who is typically challenging, you know, but in a good way? Who's going to stand up and go, what are you talking about? That's not how I would approach it. I'd do this, this, and this. So have you got that? You know, and great leaders understand that having that diverse network means that you can come up with better solutions, that your own views and perspectives have gone through a rigorous set of challenges and thought processes and changes of direction. And, you know, it's not, our thinking cannot just be linear. And when we make decisions and interact with people, it can't just be, yep, that's the road and we're going to go down it. So not only what's around the corner, but what's above, what's below, what's to the left, to the right, you know, all around us. And so if you have people that are thinking differently than you, and if you've presented a problem, or you might have presented a solution, and that has gone through the process of being challenged, tested, etc., what you present is going to be absolutely more resilient, future-proof, client-proof, world-proof, because you will already have gone through that grueling process of analysis. Is this okay? Is it right? Is it appropriate? Is it at the right time? Whatever the questions around it may be. And the third question that she talks about, which is my favorite, if I've got to tell you the truth, is how courageous are you about abandoning a practice that actually has made you successful in the past? That is proper gold. So you've done this, you know, 20 years ago I did this, 10 years ago I did this, and it was great. It really worked. And actually, I'm pretty sure that if I do that again, it'll also be great. It'll work. But will it work as well? And the context roughly might be the same, but the situation is different. We are different. Our knowledge is different. The people surrounding us in that sort of practice might be different. The world has evolved and changed. Demands within and outside of organizations have changed, expectations. And so have I ever, well, she asks, leaders should absolutely stop doing what's familiar and what's comfortable. And mainly because it's easy, and push yourselves to sort of dare to be different, dare to do something different, dare to approach it from a different angle. So it's not just about thinking about the risks, but it's about leaning into them. And you know, she concludes with, you know, what makes a great leader, and I'm not going to spoil it, so I'm not going to tell you what Rosalind's conclusion is around a great leader and what she thinks a great leader is, but I'll probably, if I may, share with you what I think is a great leader, or rather what Emerson thought was a great leader. And he says, do not follow where the path may lead, but go instead where there is no path. So my encouragement to you is to look for constructive disagreement, is to ensure that we understand the values of the voices around us, the different perspectives, the diversity of thought that is around you and you might not be aware. So listen properly, actively listen, because when you understand different cultural backgrounds, etc., it might help you go where there is no path. If we can have the next slide, please, Luke. So I've just mentioned cultural difference, and I think in order to think about this a little bit more in depth, we need to go back to the concept of culture. Now, according to Wikipedia, and it's a really nice definition, and I'm probably biased slightly because it taps into very much the anthropologist in me, which is what I studied, and it's defined as culture as an umbrella term, which encompasses social behavior, the norms, the institutions that are found in human societies. But it also touches upon knowledge, beliefs, arts, laws, customs, and very often is attributed to a region or to a geographical location. But I'm going to challenge you on that, because I think that companies also have cultures. Teams have cultures. So most of us are already part of two. Forgetting our cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, etc. We're already part of a company culture and of a team culture. And if you think of all the elements that make up culture, we have lots of, enriching data sets around culture that make us up. And there's a really interesting article that reminds me that I was reminded of this morning, because I did a post on LinkedIn about it. And the article is by Comissio Global. And they gave examples of 7 great case studies where the understanding of culture paid off in mergers and acquisitions and didn't. And the two, I guess, opposite sides of the spectrum of that, where culture and the failure to consider culture as an absolutely fundamental element of putting two groups, two companies together with different value sets, different strategies, different ambitions, different accepted or non-accepted behaviors, and all of that context forgot. So who forgot to align that and to find maybe a third new one that could embrace all of those was in the Daimler-Benz Chrysler case. And who instead realized the power of that and managed to leverage it was BNP Paribas. Now, on the screen at the moment, you've got 2 of the dimensions found in World Prism, in World Prism profiles. Hopefully, most of you will be familiar with those. And so today, because we're talking about decision making, these are both quite powerful dimensions when we're talking about culture and cross-cultural decision making. And they are risk avoiding versus risk taking, and facts versus thinking. Now, as probably quite clearly, risk takers are more comfortable with understanding that the future is ambiguous and that you can't mitigate every risk. It's not about being reckless, but it's certainly about being experimental and accepting extremes. Whereas obviously the risk avoiders are the complete opposite of that. They work on having knowledge and cover off as many outcomes as possible, and they feel quite uncomfortable not having not having thought through and considered as many possible outcomes as possible. Your fact-orientated people instead have obviously a preference for facts when they approach information, and so they want to see the data, the hard evidence. Versus those who are thinkers, if they have that orientation, or if you are a thinker more than a facts-based person, you want to talk about the methods and talk them through and really understand how you've come to a certain conclusion and what assumptions you've made to reach that conclusion. So, we've talked a little bit about unconscious and some of our biases, and probably the concept of unconscious bias is not new to you. So we're not going to go into that in huge detail. But the point is that our biases feed our thinking, and therefore our biases feed our decision making. And what looks like in this case, for example, what this looks like if you're risk avoiding is that you'll only see danger in various options. And if you're risk taking, you actually only see the bright side of things. You think, hey, if we don't try, well, who knows? But what that also means is you dismiss who disagrees with you. So you surround yourself, and go back to the stakeholders that we were talking about, you surround yourself with what's more similar to you. And so a decision, I truly believe that a decision that incorporates wide perspectives allows you to think about new, innovative, alternative solutions or conclusions, and when you question things from a variety of range of perspectives. Next slide, please, Luke. So I'd like you to go through this scenario, and I'm going to read it, but I also appreciate that some people might want to reread it alone, so I'll give you some time to do this. But what I'd like you to reflect upon here is on the chart on the right. So what does that look like, and how is it applicable to this scenario? So Wendy and her team have had a great idea. They want to market a revolutionary energy-saving device in China, rather than in their traditional markets in Europe and the US. Sunli presented some really exciting high-level market research showing that 85% of people loved the idea. 95% didn't have anything bad to say, or negative to say, and 75% loved the design. The head of sales, Tanya, is in favor. New market helps her achieve her targets more easily, and Wendy's presentation had some great numbers. 6 months later, though, they've only made 7% of the projected sales. So my question to you, and if you'd like to pop your answers in the chat, are, what went wrong for Wendy? How come 6 months later, after their campaign, the launch of their campaign, they've only made 7% of the projected sales when the numbers that Sunli presented were so good? So I'm going to have a look at what's in the chat while I give you time maybe to reread over those. Okay, so some of the things coming through are great. The market research was not from the Chinese market. Yeah. She did not question numbers. Data was not diverse enough. The way the questions were posed led to positive outcomes. Because the asked persons did not want to say anything negative, but they also did not say, yes, I buy it. Okay. Bad data. Yeah. The right questions were not asked. Didn't invest in culture investigation. Okay, really, really good answers there in the chat, and thank you so much. But if we look at this chart on the side, as I mentioned, there isn't a lot of diversification. So again, the elements that led to Wendy making a particular decision weren't informed and weren't diverse enough. Because if we look at where most of them were risk takers, along the same line of, well, let's take a risk. Let's not go into the traditional markets of Europe and US. And also, there wasn't enough difference between those who were seeking the facts and thinking. They were all quite similar. So if you know your team, dear Wendy, has a similar profile, what you need to do is actively look for an opposing devil's advocate, and really make sure that, of course, equally, if they'd all been risk avoiding, then they would never have found any market for the new products. But what's important is to actively seek out where there could be difference and where there could be an opposing view to yours to help you make a better decision. Let's move on to the next slide, please, Luke. I'm mindful of time. So what I'd like us to do is a mural activity and look at this from 2 points of view. So what do you think are the symptoms of a group think? So what are the things that trip us up if we're in a group think, if we all are similar What are the things that can lead us to group thinking? And how can you avoid it? So let's all pop on this mural. What do you think are the elements that lead us to groupthink? What are the symptoms? What type of scenarios are in play within your organization or within a given organization for people to sort of all think in the same way? Okay. I'm going to see if, Luke, can you kindly enhance some of the, that's it. That's great. Thank you. That's brilliant. Okay, so let's have a look at some of them. No different viewpoints shared. Absolutely. Similar approaches to all challenges. Too much harmony. No discussion. Love that. Yes, no discussion. Filtering out unpalatable truths. That's a great one. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, no disagreement. Again, as well, very, very much leading into groupthink. No out of the box thinking. Fantastic. Yes. Yes, let's again think about looking around the corners and not just heads down. What else have we got? No invitation of others to share point of view. Yep. Similar people always making the same decisions. Fast decision making, but decisions are not robust. Absolutely. Yes, men. That's a good one. I like that. Unquestioned beliefs. Absolutely. Refers brilliantly. That refers brilliantly to the example that I gave about mergers and acquisitions. Yeah, absolutely. We don't question things, and therefore we assume. We assume that there are no different points of view, no beliefs, but also that these aren't challenged. What are they? Are they different? Too much harmony, I think we know. The group is too closed. Absolutely. So these are all absolutely valid suggestions as to what are the symptoms of group thinking. Lack of diversity, 100%, 100%. That's an interesting one. They do not want to hurt each other. That's a really interesting one, and it might we might be able to pick it up slightly later on. But I am mindful of time, so maybe if we move to the second mural now, as to how do you think you can avoid groupthink? And you've all been fantastic and populated this already so thoroughly. So actively ask what we are missing. Yeah. Open leadership. Absolutely. Allow new points of views to be shared first. Ask for perspectives before sharing the suggestion or decision. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely great one. Someone already says what their solution or what the suggestion is and then says, hey, what do you all think? It's more, it's less likely that someone will put their hand up and say something different, especially if in the room there's more groupthink. Excessive deference to figurehead person. Yes, absolutely. Create a safe zone to fail and to make mistakes. Yes, yes, and yes. Instill doubts. Interesting. Train creativity. Yes, I like that. But I also instilling doubts is good. Yeah, make suggestions that make people think, and sometimes, through the challenge, you can sort of make people doubt their thinking, but in a constructive way. I like that. Take time to think about alternatives, absolutely, and no fear of saying no or bad idea, absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to pick that up, that element there of cultural, psychological safety. So this is amazing, and as I imagined, we are. You are all so engaging and engaged, and I'm getting so much from the session myself, and I hope it's the same for you. But unfortunately, 1 hour is never enough time. So I'm going to hop back onto our slide deck and click to reveal some of our thoughts, which you supplemented so well in terms of what symptoms there are. And some of the ones that we considered are rationalization, peer pressure. So some of you had picked up on the element of not challenging authority and things like that, and complacency. That could also be one. Moral high ground, stereotyping. I think that's a really big one, and illusion of unanimity, but also censorship. And I think that word there, censorship, makes me think of again something that you picked up on the mural is are people allowed to, or is there fear of people stepping outside, putting their idea outside the box, or saying, can we look around the corner rather than just look down? And that's about psychological safety. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Luke. I think key cultural intelligence decision-making skills are psychological safety, and I've just linked into that, to encourage disagreement, to absolutely, so one of you said, to instill doubts, create a little bit of uncertainty, but also disagreements, and create a situation where not everyone is necessarily saying yes, but allowing for that and making sure that people feel safe in doing that without fear of reprimand or anything negative. Questioning, my favorite, or rather, no, maybe it's not my favorite, maybe listening is my favorite, but questioning at 100%. Really make time to be curious, to ask, to invite others to do the same to you, and listening. So that's where I'm torn, questioning or listening, but listening is important, and we don't do enough of that. So really actively listen and invite other people's opinions and really absorb them and let them nourish you. And I think you've supplemented on the previous one, talking about the symptoms, and if there is anything as well in particular that you'd like to share in the chat that you think is missing from here. But I think these 3 elements are really important in sort of making culturally intelligent decision making, decisions and informed decision making. And this is a skill. Cultural intelligence is a skill that we can nurture and we can develop. And I think these 3 elements are absolutely crucial in order for us to do that successfully. So if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to talk you briefly only through the last 2 paragraphs, because the first 2 are the same. So we saw Wendy, and we're allowing ourselves to show the effect and to think about the effects of implementing cultural intelligence into this scenario that we saw Wendy in before. So Wendy and her team have that great idea, suddenly presents the stats, and everyone's excited. But in this revised scenario, Tanya challenges Sunli to explain how he got this idea. And actually, it turns out that the sample size was only 100 people from Shanghai. And one of you in the chat had rightly anticipated this. So she also asks Wendy if she discussed it with her account managers in Europe and the US. So Wendy, in the first Wendy, had omitted to consider the other 2 traditional markets. Whereas the now Wendy, the second scenario Wendy, has the cultural intelligence to think about this. And she thinks that they actually would be very unhappy not to get such a product early on. And so the conclusion, the scenario, ends up that they agree a limited launch in China, but the focus still remains in the US. And the account managers are delighted with that response, and the huge growth occurs for everybody. So the limited launch is also a success, which looks like it can then become a solid market. But if you look at the chart on the right, which is very different from the previous one, there is now a little bit more balance between those who are risk avoiding and those who are risk taking, and enabled, therefore, the decisions to be made in a more balanced and more informed, with a richer data set. And again, the facts versus the thinking, that's a little bit more spread out and a little bit more balanced. So it's the same scenario, but Tanya has had the psychological safety to challenge and actually assert her cultural values rather than decide to conform to the group. Because she might have had those thoughts initially, but maybe the first scenario didn't allow her to do so. Next slide, please, Luke. So key takeaways from me for today are awareness of bias. So really consider how your thinking style affects how you treat evidence and data. And be wary when everyone agrees with you. I was chatting to Luke just before you all joined, and how unstimulating is it if you're sat in a boardroom and someone is presenting and talking, and at the end comes, anyone any questions? Anyone any different suggestions? And there is silence. That wall of silence. And that can only reinforce bad decisions or outcomes that are limited or solutions that are limited. So really challenge assumptions and perceptions and invite others to do the same. Take other views into consideration and really enrich that experience. And it's a two-way process. So yes, you need to be able to feel the psychological safety as well, to challenge assumptions and perceptions, but also invite others to do the same. Ask the question, what do you think? Would you have, I've just presented something to you, would you have approached it differently? Be open to that. Be open. And really learn about others and other people's cultures. So I'd like to remind you of the learning path. Hopefully you're all familiar with it on the platform, and to really delve deeper into your learning around this. And use your own world prism profile to learn about your cultural preference style, but also it might help you leverage how to understand others, those preferences and those styles of others, and how to interact better cross-culturally. Shortly after we finish, there will be a survey that pops up on your screens, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do this. We always welcome your comments and your feedback. We want to make these sessions as interesting and as interactive as possible, given the short space of time. But I would also encourage you to watch the video, the one at the end, which is taking the bias out of decision making. It's not shown on the screen, but it's slightly further down, and you can find that within the learning path, because it really does relate to this session. So that's it from me. Last closing slide, please, Luke. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your days, afternoons, and mornings to be with us today, and to really, I would really encourage you, because some of the main outcomes that have been proven by research in terms of culturally intelligent teams, and therefore culturally intelligent decisions that are made, are that they reduce business risk. They allow us to make better informed decisions. It is great for inclusion and diversity of thought, and it enables and supports creative and innovative solutions. So my closing to you is, why not? Thank you ever so much for your time today, and I really hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you so much.